So welcome, Ashley. Thank you very much for joining us for your presentation. Okay? That's your turn.
Amazing. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very, very much for having us. It's really exciting to join you and join this excellent conference. And I've been taking a look at some of the talks, and it's pretty exciting stuff you guys are talking about. It's really, really pertinent. And over the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to hopefully take you through the first topic there, which is the 3 components of your Agile AI stack. And this is how to build products that people actually want to use with AI in them. And then you'll notice that there's another header there, which is structuring machine learning projects. And then that's going to be done by Yersat, who is on the call as well. So we're essentially going to be doing a bit of a continuation from my section into his own. We collaborated a little bit on, well, I wouldn't say AI projects per se, but a lot of discussions. And we thought that these topics kind of married each other really, really well. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump in. Now, the core hypothesis here is really based on a couple of foundational pieces I'm going to get to in the beginning of this talk. And the first thing I want to kind of level set with is where a lot of organizations are at in their AI journey. And this was a talk, or sorry, a document that was produced by Element AI back in 2020, which seems like a long time ago. But if you look, there's about 80% of companies that are still in the exploration phase or the experimentation phase of developing AI. And the remaining 20 are in various states of, formalizing their AI processes or optimizing them or transforming their business. Now, what I'm going to talk through a bit today is how to take that 52 and turn it into the 14. So how to move from experimentation to formalization. And the key bit that is also reflected when you're formalizing in the document is that AI solutions, when you're in the formalization stage, require a clear business case. And we're not just doing it to do AI anymore. We're doing it to actually generate, value for the business. And those business cases are wrapped with, performance metrics that need to be achieved. And this is one of those jumps that requires a lot of thinking, and it's not that straightforward. So I'm going to hopefully take you through some of the ways to do that today. And really what this means as you go from experimentation into formalization and even beyond is moving from building AI for the sake of building AI. And that sounds like a good idea at the very beginning when you're just kind of getting a feel for the technology. But it's not always a great idea because you end up building stuff that no one either needs or uses or just doesn't meet the objectives that you're requiring to be met. So one of the foundational bits in this talk is this idea that AI is not, the technology side at least, isn't as big as a challenge as it used to be. And now with a lot of the emerging frameworks, and we heard a little bit about MLflow, and a lot of these systems which make it easier to build models mean that we're going to be able to build not so good stuff faster. And that's not good. So really what we're going to try and do here is try and take you through a way of identifying what a fit AI product looks like and build something that actually solves real problems for people. And these objectives are the following for the talk. Our first is, how are we going to reason about AI initiatives? So how do we select ones, or how do we think about them in such a way that make it easier for picking ones that are actually going to be valuable for our business? The second one is, how do we prioritize? So knowing where these AI solutions are going to be located in your value chain, how do we pick ones that are going to either eliminate more waste or generate more value? Once we know that we want to do a certain one, how do we identify the number that it needs to reach to generate value? And then how do we accelerate the delivery of these initiatives once we've actually started, putting code into the IDE? We heard a little bit on the last talk about Kanban, and I'm kind of assuming a bit of background knowledge here of the people on the call here, that they know a little bit about what Kanban is. But just think about Kanban as like a series of steps of your process to deliver value. And you start with a backlog on the far left, and let's just pretend we've got an AI opportunity way back in the backlog. The first step here is, or at least the first stage in your development, is opportunity sketching. Think of it as this as like starting to craft the idea and starting to learn a little bit more about the context of it and where it fits into your value stream and how it will benefit your business. And there are really 3 things that you need to do to complete this stage, which are, number 1, complete an AI canvas. And I'm not going to be as prescriptive here, but we found that these things are really, really good to do. So complete an AI canvas, identify how the AI actually generates value. And then the third is, once we know how it generates value, figure out what the value model needs to be. Once you've gotten through this stage, you can start moving to actually solution design and then actually development, test, and deploy. And that's where your set's going to step in. So the first 3 topics, or at least 3 items, they are going to be on me, and then your set's going to take care of the last one there. The first foundational insight that it kind of comes slowly sometimes when you're developing AI is that AI and human systems typically hand in hand. And in most cases, when you're developing an AI product, you're embedding it in an existing human solution. And when you zoom out from that, think about how businesses are formed or how humans actually interact. And it's usually in such a way like this, where at the top left, you have an event. And something happens, and it creates either an opportunity or it presents a problem for a customer or user, somebody in your system. And most companies come out of this problem. They say, you know what, let's create a process. Let's figure out how to solve this problem and create a solution. Now, when you're dealing with knowledge work and you're dealing with human systems, typically a human process looks something like the following, where the first thing you do is you gather some input. You figure out, what the situation is. And then you apply your knowledge and your understanding and your learning to solve the problem. So you start modeling what the solution could be. You then predict what the future is going to be if I do a certain thing. And then I judge based on that prediction. So it's like, if I predict that something is going to happen, well, I'm going to act as if that's going to happen, or I'm going to make a certain decision based on what that means, and I'm going to take action. And I'm going to show you how this works in a real use case in just one more slide. But it's really important to kind of see this as a flow. And the insight here is that with AI, what's really happening is that the flow that you're going through, the way that you're solving a problem, generates an outcome. With AI, what we do is we take those outcomes and we take the results of those outcomes and feed them back into the actual predictions themselves. And that way we can start learning and we can start figuring out how to tune the model, i.e. this knowledge bit, to make better predictions. And because I make better predictions, I make better actions, which means that I get better outcomes. And this is that virtuous feedback loop that AI is so powerful with, and it actually is able to accelerate with more information, more data, better models. So think of this as the frame for how we're going to talk through solving a problem. So in the previous talk, we talked about, sometimes clients don't understand their use cases, or sometimes they're trying to do something that doesn't really fit AI as neatly. And the solution we're going to kind of wrap this talk around is think about fraud detection at a large financial institution. And typically their process goes something like this. Well, the event on the other side of this map is that somebody suffered, let's just say, an injury, okay? And because of that injury, let's just say I broke my arm, I'm gonna file an insurance claim for the medical bills on that arm. Now, in most major organizations that are in insurance already, they have a rules engine of sorts, which does, some high-level analysis to identify whether something is fraudulent or not. And that, if I identify it as fraud, I would deny the claim, or I would choose to deny the claim. Now, in certain other cases, when the rules engine isn't as certain, you pass that claim over to a claims investigator. This investigator needs to either investigate or not. So this is one of those decision points where it's like they can quickly see whether this is going to be something that I have to investigate or not. So think of that and just keep that in the back of your mind right here for a second. Once I've chosen to investigate or not, I can then decide whether to pay the claim or not. So based on the merits of what's in the claim, I'm going to be able to make not only one decision, but 2 decisions. One, I'm going to investigate it or not. And then second, I'm going to decide to pay it or not. Now, remember what we just talked about that human process map? Think of it like this. And I know I just kind of clouded things up, but I'm going to try and kind of tease it apart. So remember, I broke my arm. So that was the event that generated the claim. So event happens, generates a claim. The claim also serves as input. Okay, so now my system is able to ingest that as input. We have two sources of knowledge and understanding in the system today. Okay, one is in the rules engine. Another is in the claim investigator. Okay, this is their brain. This is their mathematical model. This is their biological mathematical model that they're applying to either make a decision as to whether a claim is, to be investigated or not, as well whether it is fraudulent or not. So what I can do then, I can make predictions over. I'm going to predict whether the claim is fraudulent or not, and I make judgments. I'm going to make a judgment as to whether to investigate or not, and that investigation is my action. Now, the key insight here is that if you just do this with your existing processes, it makes figuring out whether something is AI-able or not really, really easy, okay? Because now I can say, okay, if I am making a prediction, great. Now, what is the outcome of that prediction? And how does that data feed back in to improve my predictions? So I usually like to start the use case here, which is draw the process map, identify each of these components. So where is the event? What is happening, which is creating the situation? Where's my input? And if I'm missing something here, it might mean that it either doesn't exist or that I need to dig a little bit more. But if I have at least all of these components, I can do what I do in step 2, okay? Step 2 is, well, pardon me, I jumped ahead of myself. Step 2 is I build a canvas. So there's an AI canvas. Now, I'm going to quickly contextualize the word canvas a little bit for the audience here, because not everybody has built an AI canvas and not everybody will have built a lean business canvas, but think of a canvas as a way of representing your business on a single piece of paper. And this comes from, I think it was Steve Case from AIOL that came up with the lean startup. Okay, Eric Ries wrote about it. But the lean startup is effectively a way of saying, this is the minimum set of things that I need, minimum set of ingredients that I need to build a business. And they've got things like, what is the key activity I'm going to do? What is the value proposition I'm going to create? And think of this as having one document for my business. Well, we can also have one document for our AI. Okay, and this AI canvas came from a book called Prediction Machines, where they had laid out what I talked about earlier, those components onto a single page, which are, let's make a prediction. What is the judgment we're making? What's the action I take? What's the outcome I want to achieve? Where do I get my improvement data? Where do I get my training data? And what will I use as feedback to essentially tune my system? This was published, I think, in 2017 or 2018. And since then, we've significantly extended the AI canvas. So this is one of those screenshot moments where you can essentially capture this canvas and take it away to your next AI engagement such that you can answer these questions and it's going to simplify your life, okay? Because at least by answering these questions, you will have figured out whether we have a thing that is actually able to be used, we can use AI on, okay? And whether we're optimizing for the right thing. So I'm just going to quickly go through what is on the canvas, and it's pretty self-explanatory, but at the top, you have the context. So who are the actors? Who are the people? Who are what are their motivations? What is going on with them? Okay, if you get to know the people, you can start understanding that brain. You can start understanding their reasoning process around the AI solution that needs to be brought in. Okay. The second thing you want to talk a little bit about is the situation. So what is the event? What was the moment that created the data, that created the need for a prediction, that made you have to make a decision, that made you take an action? So that is the event. And properly document that, and then document that process. So it's similar to what we did with that fraud case. What is the process that's followed in response to that event? Okay. Once you have an understanding of that, what is the system? So sometimes understanding what the system is optimizing for, or what they are biased towards, or what their incentives are, will give you some good directional guidance on whether or not to implement a specific algorithm. Your set's going to get into a little bit more later about interactions with clients, but this is one of those questions that if you answer, you're more than likely going to stay aligned with your client by understanding that. Now, on the left-hand side, so this is the second row down, I've got those bits of that process map that I showed you before. Okay, so the first one is, what is the information? What is the input into the system? Okay, and I sometimes like to answer these questions on the left-hand side here, which is like, what is this complexity? Okay, What is its availability? Do I actually have access to it? How fast is it coming out of me? What is the volume? What is the velocity? What is the volume? How much of it do we have? And previous talk spoke a little bit to that, is that if you do not have enough, you're probably going to be in trouble. Variability. Okay, so is it variable? Is there too much randomness in the information, or do we need to do a lot of work in preparing features? The other thing is veracity. So can it be actually verified? Once I know that, okay, what is the model that the person is applying? And this is a really, really good starting point to identify what your feature should be and what people are looking for in the data to understand how to directionally guide a prediction on the prediction. So once again, if you've screenshot this, I want to highlight just one bit here because we're going to go through this pretty quickly. The second bit there, so think. If a given actor knew, not predicts, knew whatever it is, they would have an unfair advantage. And that's what your prediction is. And just by answering that question in that sequence gives you a good idea of what you're actually trying to predict. Sometimes it's not easy to tell apart a prediction versus a decision, but by just answering that, it's usually pretty cool at getting you where you need to go. Another question you want to ask with your client is likely, what is the required accuracy? Okay, so where do I have to get? And that will give you an idea from their perspective what the existing accuracy is and whether it has to meet a certain threshold to accept or refute. If you go way over that threshold, you're likely going to spend a lot of time optimizing something that does not need to be optimized. Next thing I want to get into is what is the decision? So in response to that prediction, what does the person think? What is the decision that they want to make as a response? So if it's a fraudulent or not, well, I have to decide whether to mark it as fraud or not, or I have to decide whether to investigate or not. And that action is like, do I mark denied? Do I mark it as paid? Do I actually do something in response to that? What is that? Okay. And what is the skill? Now, the directionality on the task bit gives you a lot of help in understanding how to deploy your application and deploy your AI system. Because at the end of the day, AI is not just a model that operates on its own, it is integrated into a system. And if there are follow-on actions, you need to know how to kind of integrate that with your client's value chain. So answer that question definitely. After that, the training. So like, what can directionally guide your predictions? Where do I feed back into? How long is it going to take me to get that information? And what are we optimizing for? Now, optimizing for is a good question for your client to answer because they're going to tell you, I need it to hit a certain target, or I'm optimizing for making more money, or I'm optimizing for whatever they end up telling you they're going to optimize for. This is another one of those ones that it's good to get on the same page with the client early because you might optimize their business for something they don't want. So just do this to kind of put your AI solution on one page and get alignment across the groups. Okay. Now, typically what you would do is you would overlay this exact thing onto that process map. So in the remote world, we've been making a lot of use of digital whiteboards. So you might just paste both of them on the same boards and then just line them up. Okay. It's a really good way to make sure there's common collective alignment on between yourself and the client side, or internally at a bank, or at a financial institution, or any other big business. Having one place for everybody to gather around would be really, really good as well. So in the final step of this AI canvas is to create your AI mission statement. So once you've done the canvassing part, you can essentially just drag and drop and replace these boxes here where it's like when the event happens, it would enable the actor. You can essentially take that from your AI canvas and put it here. And this is a more succinct way of indicating what you intend to do. And in the FI fraud example, it looks something like this. So when a claim is filed, if I can enable claims investigators to predict which claims are fraudulent, then they would have an unfair advantage in deciding whether to investigate or not. And then investigate more effectively, realizing fewer fraudulent claims indicated by fewer payouts. Now, there may be other ways of shaping this, but this is one of those ways to get on the same page with your client as well, and make sure that you can refer to something when you're obviously working towards a mission. You can say, no, we're in line with the mission. Is there something that needs to be changed? So I've already gotten you through the AI canvas as well as the creation process. So that creation process was essentially identify the series of steps that your solution needs to go through, and then essentially lining that up. The last step that I'm going to take you through is the AI value model. So before I get really deep into the AI value model, I kind of want to level set on what a value model is. Think about your value model in terms of like, I as a business accept inputs and I generate outcomes. I create value with those inputs. And the reason why you have a value model and you systematically state it is you then know what falls into the realm of your business. You only would go for things that would actually support the value model or increase the return on investment of your value model. It also serves as a way of surfacing assumptions around how the business works. And once again, as somebody who is going in to help an internal team or an external team develop an AI solution, typically understanding how the business works is a really good idea. So once you kind of figure out what your value model should look like as a business, think about how AI generates value. Well, AI takes these events that I had talked about earlier, turns those into inputs, creates predictions, which result in judgments, result in actions, which generate value. Okay, so think about that bottom like swim lane of sorts as being what the AI does. The key value driver in this case here is the prediction. Okay, without a prediction, I actually don't have AI. So the quality of the prediction is really what we're looking to optimize for when we're building AI systems. And the question then becomes two questions become obvious, right? Which is, if prediction quality is so important, is there a good way of either baselining the present value of my prediction quality, and then on top of that, using that baseline to evaluate, whether I'm actually generating any value from these investments that I'm making in AI? So how can I answer those two questions? So before I got into AI, I was really heavy into business, and I'm going to kind of go back to something from business school, which is net present value. So the concept of net present value, I'm going to explain in a bit, but think about what if I would, could I take a net present value of the quality of my future decisions? And just as a reminder for everyone, this is what net present value is. So think about net present value as a way of evaluating future cash flows. So if I'm going to make money in the future, how well does that offset investments that I've made in present day? And usually you look at it in a way that if the net present value of my investment is greater than zero, it means that I made money. If it's less than zero, it means that I would have lost money. And at net present value of zero is where I break even. Okay, so going to use that same kind of set of ideas on an exact example. So let's pretend that I'm doing a fraud detection for AI, okay? The first little bit, I'm losing money, right? Because I'm not actually leveraging the AI to benefit, and I'm spending money on consultants and compute and people to, build these fancy models for me, okay? So think about that in the process of building a model, and then not only building, but also deploying model. Remember, a model that's sitting on the shelf didn't make you any money. Now, a model that's in production that's actually, turning out predictions will generate revenue. So from this left-hand axis to this part here, think about it as negative money. So I'm going down. And at this point here, my deployed model reaches a threshold for which I actually start making money. So it's a positive return on each prediction. So in the case of the fraud detection, I start identifying more frauds than I used to, which means that, I'm not spending more money on claims, or I'm not having to investigate as much. So now I'm starting to return funds on that investment, okay? And at this point here is where I break even. Think of the slope as well. Actually, I should jump to this before I go to the net present value. Think of the slope as how, if my predictions are so good and I can make them really, really, really quickly that I start offsetting other operational costs, I will pay back more quickly. So the slope of this line is a function of just how well you're predicting. And remember what I said, at zero is where I cross over. When you model this out, what you should see is that if your AI is good, the area here, so how much it costs for me to essentially build and deploy and then start recouping my investment. If the area inside this shape here is less than the area here where I will deploy and I'll enjoy the benefits of the AI solution, if this area is A is less than B, I make money, okay? So just think about that for when we're actually gonna apply this to a real example. So first thing you got to do is you first got to figure out what's going on with the existing system. That's going to be your baseline. So how many predictions am I making? So if I'm doing, let's just say 10,000 a year, okay, I make 10,000 a year, okay? And every single time that I make a prediction, how much does it cost me? Okay, well, it might be $30, let's just say, or $100 or 100 euros or whatever it is. I need to know those. I also need to know what my current accuracy rate. So how frequently do I make a good decision or a good prediction? Okay, sometimes that's 10%, sometimes 5%, but get that on paper. Now, with all that, I can start identifying the net present value of my AI investment. And I'm going to kind of show you how that works in a real example. So let's just pretend, using that same fraud and insurance objective scenario that we were talking about earlier, that my current success rate is 15%. So I am successfully litigating 15% of the claims. And what I'm hoping is that somehow that 15% turns into a greater number so that I can offset the cost of deploying the AI solution. And some other baseline assumptions that I've got to make are, how much do I pay every single time? Okay. And that's average cost per claim. It's actually average cost per investigation. And how much am I going to invest in AI? Now, these are really, really small numbers, but let's just say I spend $200,000 a year. Now, when I ran a net present value calculation, you can do this in essentially your Google Sheets or your Excel. They have an NPV calculation. It actually looks something like this. So 15% used to be the historical average. Okay, so the accuracy is on the right here. And I every year spend $200,000. Okay, so this green box here is how much I'm out of pocket over time. Now, in this case here, what happens is that I'm starting, let's just say at a number, the model essentially says, okay, you start at a lower number and get to a higher number. I cross over sometime in, year 2.5, and this is another parameter you can set, and I have to hit 21.8%, which means that I've got to increase my accuracy from 15% to 21.8% in order for this AI solution to break even. And it looks like over time, I will eventually break even sometime in year 5, which is when my total investment actually breaks through. So what you're going to want to do is take this information and provide it to the executive team, either as an internal consultant or external consultant, and make some really good assumptions here just to make sure that you're both not signing up for something you can't accomplish. Okay, so you can always use net present value to essentially indicate what accuracy number you actually need to reach. So we're almost at 30 minutes in, so I'm just going to quickly summarize where I've gotten you so far, and then we'll take some questions, and then Yirsat will jump on for the second half here. So the takeaways here, there's really 3 main takeaways, I think, from the first half here, which is the first one is think of your AI canvas as not only a level setting tool, it's a way of answering who, why, and what questions. Try as much as you possibly can to avoid answering how questions. How questions happen later. As soon as I start asking how, I start already situating how we're going to deliver a solution, and it's jumping to solution kind of mode. You're really trying to optimize for figuring out the who, why, and what, just to make sure that people are aligned on those things. Those are actually more important than how. The second takeaway here is relating to your process diagram. So typically what happens is when you actually lay out your process diagram and then you identify the event, you identify the input, you identify the model, you identify the prediction, you put those boxes on a model and you start lining them up. What you start realizing is that if I implement AI here, I can get rid of an entire step completely. And that's because there were maybe some downstream things that needed to be done because we weren't so confident in how the prediction was made, or we weren't so confident in how the process was going to be executed if we had certainty. So always take your process map, overlay those items, and then see if there were any other opportunities, because those other opportunities may end up being more value associated with the solution. So this feeds into your net present value calculation. It helps you go, okay, well, if we could solve that, we also solve this. Okay, that's extra money that I can claw back, which makes my accuracy number that I have to reach much lower. Okay, so this is one of those moments where you might be able to win really big by not only decreasing your target accuracy, but making overall business re-engineering changes that are even more valuable for the business. Third point, okay, so typically people just model accuracy, or they're modeling a certain type of the confusion matrix. What I recommend as well, in our case, I just modeled accuracy for simplicity. You want to model other things that are more pertinent to the business. So in the case of false negatives, so think about this in terms of like a medical procedure. The worst case is a false negative where somebody had the disease and I made a mistake and I didn't actually predict that they had the mistake, and therefore they went untreated. So in certain cases, those are the types of things you're trying to reduce with your AI solution. In other cases, I'm actually trying to increase the accuracy, okay? Or I'm trying to increase my true negative rate. Like think about the situation wherein your AI would benefit you and then model that. Because if we just optimize for certain parameters, we don't always end up actually solving a problem for the business. So just kind of keep these kind of 3 takeaways in the back of your head. And with that, I'll just pause for a second and we'll take the next 7 minutes or so for questions before we pop over to your set. Thank you.
Thank you very much for talk. Really interesting and thought-provoking. I see a lot of similarities with what we do. And yeah, we have at least one question in chat so far. Please, guys, add more questions. The first one is from Alexei. Thank you for your talk. Don't you think that Canvas looks a bit complicated? How did you explain the Canvas to business representatives or other people who do not have enough knowledge in data science?
So, so first, yes, it is complicated. And this is maybe an educational journey you have to take your stakeholder through.
Okay.
Now, the way to explain it is largely that you can almost have a conversation like this. How much is it going to cost for us to do this? Let's just say $500,000. How much is it going to cost for us to have a 2-hour meeting and make a really good decision on whether we want to do it? $200. I don't know, whatever that number is. It always ends up being really, really, really valuable to get people on the same page early. Now, you also can take that AI canvas and take off questions you do not think are worth asking, to be honest with you. But what we find is that like just asking the questions allows people to step back and think before they just blunder into an AI experiment rather than turning it into an actual AI product. But thank you. That's a really good question. It's something we haven't solved yet. Yeah.
Because this is like a combined talk, and actually we can go. I can give you some more time. But
great! Thank you.
The canvas is an yeah. So yeah, because combined. Anyways, so the canvas is an alignment tool first and foremost, and it's not set in stone, so you can really almost configure your own. But it also forces you to think about all the different pieces. And I find it a very good alignment tool where if you bring all the stakeholders together and you explain each piece and how to fill it out, then you have everybody on the same page and no more surprises down the road, kind of.
I have one more question from my side. I think Canvas is a great tool for kind of try to explain to stakeholders or combine like different visions into one. But how broad is applicability? For example, if we are talking about fraud detection, it seems pretty straightforward. But if we are talking about like recommendation system for movies, can we use that? Or kind of, this kind of things that are more like traditional AI way of using AI?
So you probably can shortcut it. To Yoset's point, it's important to actually just do it for to go through the thought process. The other thing that I think that you might get value out of is the client may have a different understanding of what the AI is going to do than you do. So even though you think it's going to recommend movies, they may say, okay, they're going to recommend movies, but it's going to be fit into this other workflow over here, where they're actually going to maybe do some other downstream process with that information, which is the action part. So this is more about not only talking about what the AI does and the prediction the AI generates, the overall end-to-end solution that in the system that it fits into, which may end up being more enlightening. But at the end of the day, like I think what Yoset said is really, really applicable. Like if you feel like it's overkill, yeah, definitely strip it down. You may not need to answer all the questions, but I would tend to over-index on thinking about a lot earlier. I feel like, yes, Agile AI is, an up-and-coming thing, but similar to a lot of other really challenging problems, a thorough design phase really pays off.
Okay, I see. Another question is, what about discount rate? You have to choose the number, and it kind of depends a lot on, your NPV depends a lot on this discount number. It can be 10% or 5%. And
exactly.
It's, I think, a question of risk, right? You might think that this project is kind of risky for you and you want to have it like 30%. Mm-hmm. So choosing a discount rate might be a tricky thing to do.
So that's very true. So the discount rate obviously will take in a lot of different factors. So yeah, the risk of the project, the cost of actually getting capital, there's a lot of different factors that factor into there. I modeled this one because it's a toy example. I think I modeled it 2.5%, which is essentially the interest-free or the treasury rate here that you could get essentially funds at. But good point. Like if your product or your project definitely has more risk associated with it, you may have to increase your discount rate accordingly. But even still, I think the math will bear out that, okay, maybe I'll think about this a little differently. If I've got a portfolio and I've got other discount rates for other products in the portfolio, I would probably apply that one immediately. So let's just say that we typically amortize things at 5%. Okay, put that in. Use the one that the business is most comfortable with, because that is the best alignment device.
I see. And another thing which is important is when the money stops coming, right? The date money stops coming.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to decide, and you probably don't know, right? Because everything's going to change. A lot of marketing things, the market going to change, and a lot of, you just don't know. How would you do that?
What you can do is you can essentially cap the deployment window of your NPV calculation. You can say, okay, this model will only be in production as it stands for the next 6 months or the next 2 years, and therefore it has to pay off in that time, right? So the key insight here is that, yes, this one here, I think I'd modeled at 5 years, but if you draw the line closer to, today, the AI has to be more accurate sooner, which depending on your confidence with the ability to solve the problem, may or may not be a good idea. Because it might be really helpful for you to go, you know what, if this thing has to pay off, it has to hit this unattainable target inside 2 years. I don't know if I feel good about taking this project on. And maybe we have to pause this one in favor of another opportunity.
If you have several years, you can just choose discount rate equals to 0, because you don't have enough, credibility in what you have calculated, because it's just all assumptions, right? Mm-hmm. And the formula might be much easier and easier to understand for people, because they might start losing some, business people starting a lot of calculations of this kind. This is just my opinion, because I've come across with this kind of problems, but starting to think many even business people, in my experience, do not know what is NPV and IRR and this kind of financial things.
No, but this is I think this is almost the turning point in AI projects, where the more we speak the same language as the people that are going to be signing the checks on the $500,000 thing or the $1 million thing. the easier it is for us to actually justify and defend and provide defense around the project itself.
Okay.
And when I look online, I don't see a lot of like, here's how to value your AI product in ways that almost marry the concepts of the business world and the AI world, where we're talking about decision accuracy and they're talking about cash flow. How do we reconcile these two things? So using this common tool with just that parameter of your accuracy or your false negative rate or your true positive rate, whatever you end up being the thing you have to optimize for, almost bridges that gap. Now, I think we're in the early stages. 5 years from now, we will probably have an entire financial model suite around how to value AI products and value AI resources, because at the end of the day, this might become seen as an asset and put on the balance sheet somewhere. Like, it may become very, very valuable. It probably already is. Like, the TikTok model is probably very valuable IP that they actually do include as part of their valuation. So it'll be interesting. I think this is a first step. And as soon as anybody comes up with more, I'd love to see it.